everyone to the very first live Authology Studio sessions. This live session is an offshoot from my podcast, which I am sure, hope some of you will be familiar with. I've really enjoyed doing the podcast, which I launched earlier this year, but there was something missing, and that thing was a sense of conversation. I launched Authology nearly 5 years ago now. Next month is the 5-year anniversary of Authology. And at that point, when I first started talking about storytelling, there were very few people that were having those conversations in the market, certainly in the jewellery market. And so my role was to kind of educate and introduce people to why storytelling was so important and what it means for jewellery designers. 5 years on, there are far more people talking about storytelling. It's a far more understand phrase, and I think certainly the people that have been following me in the last couple of years already know that storytelling is really important and what it means in kind of broad terms. So I think that my role now is to actually have more dialogue, to be able to, kind of talk one-on-one, or certainly in an environment like this, where we're kind of all together, about what storytelling means for individual businesses. We're going with the theme of marketing overwhelm, which was a theme that was chosen by actually all my Instagram followers when I posed the question a few months ago when I was first planning on taking these sessions live. Now, the reason that I think marketing overwhelm chimes in with everybody is that I think it's something that small businesses and independent businesses of all sizes can understand. It's something that we've all experienced, we've all been there. And particularly at this time of year when seasonal marketing is beginning to come in, when actually it's not just the kind of day-to-day and the overall marketing in the business, but thinking about changing things for the season coming up begins to be something that everybody thinks about. And there is an unlimited amount of marketing activity that you can be doing in your business. There really is, when you run a small business, an absolutely unlimited amount that you could be doing every single day. And so, of course, overwhelm can creep in. Now, I'm assuming that everybody who is here and is watching and is listening to this knows what I talk about when I talk about storytelling, because storytelling is the foundation of the tools that I'm going to be talking about this evening. But just to lay the foundations, I'm going to outline what I see as the kind of core tenets of storytelling, as far as I see it, so that we've kind of got we've all got that to begin with. So storytelling for me covers, let's say, three sort of core tenets. The first core tenet of storytelling is that it's audience-centric. And if you've heard me talking about this, the phrase I use for this is it's not about you. Audience-centric storytelling is not about sharing the things that you think matter to you, your history, your point of view, your inspiration, how you work. Those things may or may not form part of your story. They probably will. But more importantly, the story that you've crafted is all around your audience. Your story is about finding the needs, the desires, the values of your audience and reflecting it back to them in their voice. It's finding that crossover point between what your business offers and what your audience needs. So your story is audience-centric. The second thing to know about your brand story is that your brand story is a backbone. It needs to be focused and specific. You're getting all of those facets of your brand story down into something very, very specific that can form the foundation for everything else to come out of. So when you've identified your brand story, it's not about creating a list of we do craft, we make in the UK, we're female owned, we empower people, all these different stories. It's about saying, well, what's my one angle? What's the one thing that really taps into what my audience wants here? And it's putting that kind of front and center. And the final sort of tenet of your storytelling is that it's centered on feeling. The phrase that I use here is emotion leads to action, and you want your storytelling to lead your audience into action, which is to follow you, to engage with you, and of course, make a sale. So that's what I'm working with here when I talk about storytelling. I'm talking about the fact that you have identified what that kind of one angle is, that core messaging that's attracting your specific customer, your target customer, and that's making them feel a particular way. If you haven't got to that point in your business, that's fine. Flag that up in the comments, because actually we can talk about that in the Q&A section. I can direct you to resources, and of course that's what I do, so I can help you with that. But I'm moving this kind of talk on to assume that you've kind of got an understanding of what your messaging is in your business, that you have an understanding of who your customer is and how you're talking to them and how it is you're trying to make them feel. Because when you've got that in place, when you've drilled down to your story, when you've done the work to kind of crystallize your story, you're then able to put in place a particular set of tools that will really help you overcome marketing overwhelm. And those are the tools that I am going to be introducing to you in my talk today. Now, the first thing I want to do is talk about what the goals are, when I'm talking about marketing and what it is that we're trying to achieve, and then talk about how marketing overwhelm shows up in small businesses. So what it is that we're trying to achieve when we say we're going to get rid of marketing overwhelm. What does non-overwhelm marketing look like? Well, what it is that we're wanting to find is marketing that speaks across the customer journeys. So it's covering all of those different points that the customer is at, whether they have never come across your brand before or whether they have bought from you 3 times and you're hoping that they're going to come back and buy more and engage with you again. We're then also looking for marketing that offers value and leads to action. So actually, when we have marketing that not only gives our customers something to engage with and enjoy and educate, but then also leads them into that action, leads them into that engagement and that sale or that following, that's really vital. We're then looking for marketing that's sustainable, and this is within the individual resources of your business. Every single independent business is going to have a different setup as far as human resources, so the people within them could be one person, could be a team, and also financial resources. And so whatever kind of marketing strategy you have has to be sustainable. It's not going to lead to burnout or not being able to afford the things that you're being put in place. And finally, we're looking for marketing that reinforces the core messaging. So everything is coming back to that key core messaging of your brand story. So with that in mind, those are our goals. The opposite can very often happen. Sometimes when overwhelm appears in our business, it can look like one of 3 things. I'm just going to check chat now to see if anybody has added anything extra to me that it looks like. No, so you're probably all experiencing something similar to what I usually see in independent businesses. Overwhelm in businesses, when I see it in the people that I'm working with, usually shows up as one of 3 things: inconsistency, silence, or imbalance. And here's what I mean by those. Inconsistency in marketing is when you have a scattergun approach. There are so many platforms that we can all be using for our marketing. You have got Instagram, TikTok these days, email marketing, of course your own website with long form blog content, Facebook if anybody still uses that. There are plenty of different platforms, and of course potentially face-to-face market that's particularly relevant actually coming into the kind of Christmas and holiday seasons, face-to-face selling. So there's plenty of different platforms in which a person could be marketing themselves. There are also different customers that are engaging with your business in slightly different ways, even if they share their kind of values. You've also got different points on the customer journey, which I hinted at earlier. You've got those customers that are new, those customers that are finding their way, and those customers that have been with you for ages. So there are very many different things that you need to achieve, very many different platforms, different voices, and different ways of engaging with people on those different platforms, and it's a lot. And often what happens is that a person or a brand flicks from thing to thing. They sit down at their computer and know, I need to do some sort of marketing activity today. I'll take to Instagram. And they do. And that's great, but maybe it's not potentially got strategy behind it. So it's the same sort of story put out. Then maybe they try TikTok another day, promise in an email that actually, this is going to be the point at which I get an email out to you every 2 weeks. Do it for a month, And then the email newsletter is never emailed again. So this is really common because there is so much to choose from. If anybody recognizes this from their own marketing and their own business, give me a thumbs up or let me know in the chat. This is a super common one. The second one is actually the kind of other side to the coin of inconsistency, which is when there's too much to do, and that's silence. Or when you're the business owner, it's otherwise known as being a kind of white page syndrome. If you sit down to write an Instagram caption or an email and have no idea, now you're there, what it is that you need to write, this is really, really common. This is, plenty of thumbs up, and I've been there too. I'm a small business too. You don't know what to write because you kind of could write anything. When you don't have a structure, it's now impossible to decide what it is that you're going to say. So silence, so common and so painful. And you can sit there and think, I know I need to be writing. I don't know what to say. Maybe it's Instagram, maybe it's TikTok. What do? I could do a dance and end up doing nothing. And the third one then is imbalance. And actually, this is when you do marketing activities. So you are showing up, you're showing up on whatever platform it is that you're focusing on, but you're balancing too much either way. And when I say either way, I mean between sales and value. Your marketing activities need to strike a balance between giving something to your audience, which could be education, inspiration, connection, etc., and actually leading them into a sale, saying, well, actually, now is the time that I want something for you. I want you to come to my site or sign up for my email newsletter. I want you to come buy something from me. And it's so easy that it goes one of two ways. You have someone that's really comfortable coming on and saying, right, let me see what I'm up to. Come and do a behind the scenes tour. I'm going to talk to you about stones. I'm going to give you, a bit of a sneak peek as to what I'm doing, but won't ask for the sale, won't ask the engagement when that time comes. And the other way is when a person only comes on and does marketing activity when they've got something to sell. So there's nothing, and then come and see me at this market. Come and head to my site. I've got a sale on, or it's Christmas and I really want you to head there now. So overwhelm will tend to show up in these kind of three ways. Scattergun marketing, no marketing at all because you are that overwhelmed, or having an imbalance in what you're doing because, again, there's not a strategy behind it. Plenty of thumbs up and me's, in the comments, which is, it's not good to see, but I'm glad you all relate, because that is what we are aiming to sort out today. Is there anything else that shows up for anyone else? Anything that happens in your business that's when you know things have got too much? Put them in the chat, because if there's anything specific, I'll make sure I kind of cover that as well. Because there are 3 tools that are coming to the rescue when it comes to all of these symptoms of marketing overwhelm. And they will all be born from your brand story. So again, if you've sat down with yourself, with me, and have worked out what your core brand story is, then you can put in place the following tools that will absolutely sort out that brand overwhelm, that marketing overwhelm. Those tools are core messaging framework, a customer journey map, and content pillars and content rotation. That last one, it's one. We're counting that as one. A content rotation. And these tools are just the magic kind of fundamental tools to really stop overwhelm in its tracks, because they are going to give you structure, because they come from your story, and your story leads to strategy. So I'm going to talk about each and every one of these tools in turn. Again, ask questions as we go, pop it in the chat, or we can do that at the end. So the first of the tools is a core messaging framework. And this is a really structured document that you put down yourself. And I say structured, but it doesn't need to be long. In fact, it's actually more useful to you if you make this a really kind of brief, snappy document that puts down 4 things. The first thing that your core messaging framework should note down is your audience. Now, I'm going to take a slight digression here, a little diversion, to talk about what I talk about in storytelling when I talk about audience. Now, if you've done a kind of market report or an audience and customer persona for a positioning activity or something similar like this, you might be used to the kind of customer personas that say, well, my core customer is Maggie, she's 45, she shops at Zara, and her, income level is this is what kind of group she's in, this is what demographic she's in. That has its value potentially if you're, knowing where to target people, what kind of markets, etc., platforms that you're looking at, potentially marketing activity as far as kind of positioning and price points, etc., are concerned. But for storytelling, that is not the way that I approach customer personas and profiles. I call my customer profiles, when I'm doing them with my clients, customer motivation statements, because it's all about looking at what is motivating your customers to engage with you and sell. And that sort of motivation, which is to say a kind of set of values, could be exactly the same between Maggie, 45, Anna, 26, and whoever else, Rose in her 60s. Whatever it is that those people have got in common, it's not necessarily their demographic. Yes, to a point, things like spending power are going to come into it, but we're not talking about that. We're going to assume that, that's to be dealt with by something different. When we're talking about story, it's about communicating value on an emotional basis. And those kind of motivational things, those values are not based on demographics. So when you're looking at audience here, you're looking at what are your audience's needs, desires, values? What is going to motivate them to engage with and buy from your brand? You can also put down here, where do you engage with your audience? What are their favorite platforms to use? That is a fairly useful piece of information, because that's going to help you prioritize, which is definitely a factor when it comes to kind of overwhelm. You then want to note down what the differentiation is. Now, again, this is kind of working out what makes you different from your competitors, but through the lens of what matters to your customer. If you think, well, actually, I'm different from my customer because everybody else producing this jewelry is coming out of this country or this city, and I'm producing my jewelry in the heart of New York, which is really cool. I agree, that's really cool. But does it matter to your customer? If it does matter to your customer, if they think it's really cool, or maybe they're also in New York and so they have a kind of sense of affinity, then it's relevant, then it's part of your differentiation, it's relevant to your audience. If it's not relevant, because actually that's not the key value for your customers and there's some other thing in your business that's setting you apart, that's what it needs that you need to identify. It's that crossover point. And if you've seen my content, you'll have seen me talk about this before, I think, in a Venn diagram. What matters to your customer, what it is that you offer, and it's that crossover point. So differentiation, but through the lens of what matters to your customer. The third part of the core messaging framework is to put in your core and supporting messages. And you need to be thinking about these in a kind of hierarchy. You've heard me talk before, and as I mentioned at the start of the talk, about kind of having specific and focused storytelling behind what you do. And there's one angle that you focus in on, and then you've got all the other aspects of your story that focus that. So let's say that you decided your core angle for your story was going to be empowerment for the people that wear them, because your jewelry is big, it's statement, and you want people to feel really empowered that they are communicating what is their authentic taste, because it's unmissable. When your pieces are on the body, they're absolutely unmissable. And so the wearer gets to feel, yeah, I am wearing my taste on my sleeve, potentially quite literally. I'm feeling really good and empowered to do so. So that's your core kind of message. That's your core feeling that you're making people feel excited and bold. Your supporting story then might be the actual physical attributes of your pieces. It might be the fact that, let's say you're empowering women to wear your pieces. It might be that you have a kind of female-led or female majority team that's behind it. It might be that you've kind of got ethical promises that are very specifically linked to what matters to your customer. It might be that you're making it in a cool city, so you're making people think, well, yeah, actually, I'm kind of getting a bit of the armor of the city on. whatever it might be, it has to be relevant supporting stories, because supporting stories could be limitless. We're talking people, craft, ethics, aesthetics, inspiration story, your own history, limitless. So core story and supporting story, 3-4 supporting stories at most. And what's the kind of hierarchy and how you're talking about this? What is the key angle? And then finally, for the core messaging framework, it's what your intentions and impact are for those. And this comes down to that emotion to action. What is it you want people to feel when they interact with your brand? And having identified that is going to be really, really key with getting that together. This doesn't need to be long. Like I said, it can be short, snappy sentences for each and every one of these. But what the core messaging framework is going to enable you to do is it's going to enable you to work out what you can leave behind. What are you talking about that you don't need to be? What are you showing your audience at the moment that actually you might not need to? What are you not showing that you really should be bringing in? It also gives you something to refer back to every single time you're doing a marketing activity. Is this caption that I'm putting out, this video I'm showing, this image that I'm sharing, does this link back to making my customer feel XYZ way? Does it link back to sort of supporting that key messaging? Is this connected to one of my key stories, the key story or the supporting story? And does it show how I am different through the lens of what matters to my customer? Because if you're not doing marketing activities that kind of tap into that, potentially because you're doing marketing for the sake of it, because it's like, I know I've got to get something out today, so I'll kind of share this story. If it's not relevant within these things, it kind of helps keep you on track. And this core messaging framework will also be the foundation for all the activities that you do on top. Where is it that I'm, kind of reaching people, and what is it that I'm saying? It's something to kind of keep you focused and in check, which is so important when things get busy. Messaging can be the first to get left behind because you can be reactive. What's trending? What are other people talking about? I feel like I should be talking about Christmas or Valentine's or whatever it might be. Somebody else has spoken about this and I'm getting imposter syndrome or, FOMO that I'm not talking about the same thing. Refer back to the core messaging framework. You can jump on trends if it's all relevant. If it's not relevant to your customer, to your core message, then you don't need to worry about jumping on that for no reason at all. So that's the first tool, and it can be quite quick to pull together. It could be a big long document if you wanted it to, but it can be a really short snappy thing just to keep you on track. The second tool that you can create using your brand story is a customer journey map. Now, a customer has a journey with you. Every single customer, every individual customer, an audience member, I should say, because even people that haven't shopped with you yet, have a journey through your business at all these different stages. Now, the core stages for a customer will be as follows. There may be different stages depending on what business you have, depending on, if you're solving a particular problem, let's say. There might be a stage where they kind of have a realization, but for most customers, it's going to be similar to this. The first stage is the discovery stage. It really is the I didn't know anything about you before stage, but I've come across you, stumbled across you on Instagram or Google search results or word of mouth, and I'm just finding out what you're about. So it's really that first stage is that kind of snappy core messaging. That's where the core messaging comes in. That one sentence, they go, yep, I feel like I'm in a place for you. At this stage in the customer journey, it's all about focusing in on what that core story is. So what is that? And to give the example I spoke about earlier, you would be telling people, I'm empowering you to communicate your taste. Now, if that's not relevant to a particular customer, they might drop out at the discovery stage, and that is absolutely fine because we're not trying to mop up everybody. Actually, you want customers who kind of recognize that they're in the right place for them with people that are talking their language, and they want to go kind of further and deeper in. The second stage is understanding, and that's when your supporting stories get to come in, and that's where you start to kind of flesh out the core story that you've spoken about, your core messaging. The understanding phase is when you get to show people what you're all about and get to dig out those details that you're really proud of and you know that they're going to really engage with as well. Perhaps they're not the headlines, Perhaps they're not, the kind of real, this is what we're about. They grab you and sweep you off your feet and get you following me on Instagram. But this is the bit that's going to make you feel like you know me. That's the understanding phase. Then we come into a decision-making phase, and this is the point where a person is beginning to get ready to make a commitment being stage number 4. Commitment and purchasing are the same kind of stage, because for some people, commitment might be following you on Instagram, joining your email mailing list, and it might be 5 years before they make a purchase because, your high value jewellery or special occasion jewellery, it's engagement rings. People don't need those things every day. So that phase can be longer. You can kind of split them out if you want to, but for the purposes of this, we'll have commitment and purchase. So decision making is potentially thinking, actually, now what do they need to start feeling trust in me? Is it education? Is it more inspiration? Is it to know more about me as a person? Is it about processes? It's deepening different parts of the story, the parts of the story that make a person feel informed, in safe hands, whatever their needs are, which will come back to your kind of core messaging framework. Then finally, we're in the loyalty stage. If somebody has made a purchase, now they're going to stick around. And if you manage to keep the loop going after purchase, so it doesn't end there, they will potentially fall into repeat purchases, which, chef's kiss, that's amazing, that's what we want. But also B, they may refer other people to you, and then you have your discovery phase done for you. So that kind of customer journey map has got people in different stages, and for each and every one of these stages, the different stages that you identify that a customer goes through, you need to identify a few different things. Now, in terms of what a customer journey map looks like visually, if you Google this phrase, you will find some simple and some complicated, because this is a specific kind of marketing activity that you can do. And you really can make this as complicated as you want. You can mark this out, you can have pinging all over the place from kind of different touch points, or you can really just write out those headings, and then for each and every one, identify how and where a customer's connecting with me at all these different stages. And that's your touch points. So it's thinking, are people really finding me through social media? Are most of my Instagram followers people that are in the discovery phase? Or is that my homepage? Am I getting most of these people through Google search results? Is most of my email mailing list, are most of them loyal customers? So actually, I'm not having to do too much sales and education in the email newsletter, because I've got so many loyal customers there that it's more like a kind of chat between friends. They want to be treated like kind of inner circle people at this point. So where am I kind of touching? Where am I connecting with all of these people? And then what do the customers who are at that stage in their journey need to progress through each step? Is it more information? Is it inspiration? Is it feeling like a friend? What is the feeling they need at each and every stage in order to move through? That particular piece of paper, which, like I said, can be as complicated or as simplistic as you want it, but it all feeds from your brand story. It all feeds from what you know already about your customer and the feeling that you want them to feel overall in your brand. Once you've got that, you've got an idea of actually what your marketing activities and all of those different places needs to begin to look like. Does your Instagram need to be a mixture of welcoming, but also some educational material? Do you need to have more material on your website, your homepage, that's pinging people off to educational guides or giving them a fuller understanding of who you are, making sure that your about page is signposted really well? Because it is all about kind of connecting to that emotional feeling. And then you can also identify, what's missing? Have I done so many kind of welcome, let's see what we're about posts in the last few months that people who've been following me for absolutely ages aren't being kind of mopped in on this? They're hearing the same thing over and over. And actually this platform has, got people that I need to talk to in a slightly different way. So it will really help you kind of identify what's missing, what needs to be done. There's a pattern emerging here, and where. So that one is tool number 2. Your third tool, and you have absolutely heard me talk about this one before, because it is a natural add-on point from your brand story, something that kind of slightly starts to make itself out of a brand story, is your content pillars and content rotation. And this really helps with the white page syndrome, the I don't even know where to begin with writing, and also the kind of scattergun approach. Your content pillars is formed from your core story and your supporting story. You should have identified in the process of doing that 4 to 6 kind of themes that communicate that core messaging. So it could be, exactly the examples that I gave earlier. It's craft, it's aesthetic, it's process, etc. Themes, key themes. And it's not that more is better. I've put 4 to 6 themes. Once you get over 6, it tends to be quite unmanageable, and then you are getting out of focus. Most people in jewellery probably need 4, because for most customers, you are going to probably want to talk about kind of craft, and there'll be some ethics in there, and certainly kind of design. You also are always talking about product. So product will always be a pillar of its own as well. It could be less, but 4 to 6 tends to be the average. Now, from those themes, for each and every theme that you've written down, you need to be identifying what the impact and intention behind each of them is, because again, your marketing, just like with the customer journey, your marketing is not designed to only do one thing. You're not just trying to inspire people the whole time, and you're certainly not trying to get people to buy the whole time. You're going to have some content that's inspiring, some that's educational, some that you want to get your customers to talk back to you on, and that's all about engagement. And yes, some, approximately kind of 1 in 5, will be sales. Which of those themes kind of supports which intentions the most? When you show the behind the scenes of your bench, is it because you want to kind of educate your customer, or is that because you want them to be beguiled and engaged and find the whole thing so fascinating and begin a conversation with you? What is the intention behind each of those themes? And when you know them, you can outline then what that content is going to look like. What are the visuals going to look like for this? What's the story, the caption I'm telling? What's the voice? Is it going to be quite a casual one because, it's quite fun? I'm showing kind of styling and I want people to feel really fun and engaged and converse with me on this. Or is this a voice that's quite, genuine because I'm talking about bespoke pieces that I've made for people, and I want this to feel really sincere and kind of show the specialness behind what I do. And then when you've got them all out, you can divide and rotate. So if you've got your 4 to 6, you can think, how many times do I want to post a week? And then how many times am I going to post each theme? Let's say you post every other day and you've got 5 themes. So you've got, 15 posts in a month, 5 themes, that's 3 for every 3 times a month that you're going to do each theme, and you can just rotate them around. That's the simplest way to do it. Personally, when I do content rotations, I tend to go a little bit more kind of complicated, because some of the themes are going to need a little bit more weight. Some of them you're going to want to do more. Some of them will have easier content to produce than others. You might have a whole batch of product photos, but not so many kind of workshop tours. And of course, you also want to make sure that sort of visually the balance works, but it's possible to do this very simply. It is possible to divide them equally, rotate them round, and then you have got your content rotation in place. And with those 3 tools, you will have the foundations for a marketing strategy. So that is the kind of intro. That's the talk. That's the talk on the tools. I'm just having now a look in the chat. Yep, I have ideas and run out of steam for scheduling. Not able to. Interesting, actually. So it's finishing them that's a problem. I think potentially the content, something like a content rotation. Sorry, I should read that out properly because I forget I'm recording this for an actual podcast. There's a comment here that says, I have ideas and run out of steam for scheduling. I'm not able to finish captions, so the posts don't go out. And yet I think that's running out of steam is kind of very similar to running out of inspiration to what to write. You've probably used all of the inspiration and energy in kind of putting out this post, but actually then not necessarily having a full understanding, and I mean that just because you haven't sort of worked it out in a strategy, not that you don't get your brand, not having that full understanding about what actually this post was intended to achieve, makes it really hard to know how to finish it, and definitely self-doubt comes in there. I think I'm still stuck on the brand story. Yeah, I mean, brand story is something that is a kind of fundamental thing. I'm not sure if you have listened to my podcast before, but the very first episode of my podcast is all about brand story. That's kind of my core, the foundation of what I do. And of course, that's what I do. So feel free to talk to me if you do want help with brand story. But once you've got it in place, and once that's in place, all of this kind of activity is reasonably straightforward to pull together. Because it all comes from brand story. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to allow the chat some time. If there's any questions about what I've spoken about, or indeed in storytelling and brand story in general, my kind of plans for these more interactive live podcasts are that you can ask me anything that's kind of popped into your head in the preceding weeks. With everything I do. So I will give a couple of minutes. I've got a couple of questions that had come in ahead of time that I will go through. But yeah, now's your time. I definitely need to edit the iced tea gulps out of the podcast, I think, because that will not make any sense. Okay, so I'm going to launch in with a couple of the questions that I had messaged over to me when I announced the live Zoom for people that have not been able to make it live here this evening. So a question that I had quite a few phrased in a few different ways is that marketing overwhelm for them, I think, shows up as having, I quote, literally no idea about where to start. So absolutely no idea about where to start with kind of marketing efforts. And yeah, I think this makes a lot of sense and will probably be very familiar and relatable to a lot of people. Not knowing at all where to start suggests that there are a few kind of fundamental things missing in your kind of understanding of either your audience or your brand message, because they're the two things that you do have to have kind of nailed down in order to be able to know where to start in your marketing. So I'll begin with audience, because I think this is something that can be quite daunting, particularly for people that potentially don't have an audience yet, because they are starting a new brand or rebranding, or don't necessarily kind of know what their existing audience is about, because then you haven't engaged with them. Understanding your audience is fundamental. If you have an existing audience, there are plenty of ways that you can kind of understand what they're about. We have direct access to our audience these days on social media. You can put questions out and ask them directly for input. Actually, people really appreciate that, and I think it's become quite a common thing to do. Big brands do it, so it doesn't look unprofessional these days. It doesn't look like you don't know what you're doing and you're kind of reaching out to your audience. It looks like you're getting people involved, which people really enjoy. So do feel free to sort of ask your audience, what do you enjoy seeing from me? What is it that you like about my brand? What are the reasons that you engage with my brand? You can get that also through reviews, through comments that people leave. You can sort of do your own research if you're not asking outright as to what kind of matters to your audience. But once you understand their motivations and their values, that's when you can start to think, well, actually, how is my messaging going to meet that? Because you have to come to meet them. If you don't have an existing audience, then it's kind of working out what your positioning is in the market in terms of, who potentially your competitors are, or people that inspire you. And then going and looking at their audience. What are their audience saying to them? What are their audience saying they like about them? Why are people saying they're engaging with a particular brand? Because that will also kind of give you the intel as to where you need to be, how and where you need to be speaking to your customers. Once you understand your audience, you've got a starting point because you know where you need to focus. And this is something really important as well. If you don't know where to start, pick one thing. Do not try and do everything. That's probably quite obvious, but just pick one thing. And probably somewhere like Instagram for most jewelry customers is going to be the place because that's where you're going to getting your new customers. Assuming that kind of getting a new audience, of course, is your business goal. You might play that up and play around with that depending on whether or not actually you think that your goal is to maximize your existing customers, etc., etc. But find one place and stick with it and work out who you're talking to and what you want to hear. And then go to your brand story. And that's when you do need to get that set. So that it is important to have that set. When you have your brand story, you can then work out, okay, so I've got this is my brand story. These are the things that I'm talking about, my core messaging. This is what matters to my customer. So this is what I'm going to say. I need to get this customer to understand this about my brand. And that's where you can start. And actually, a lot of people who are starting marketing, for instance, Instagram at the same time, will take content from their brand story. So if you have an about page, especially one that's been professionally copywritten, then you can actually lift pieces from your brand story, the about page being the sort of embodiment, the full written embodiment of your brand story. You can lift things directly from that. You can identify what those kind of core messages are and just start getting them out there, and that is somewhere to start. So that's my answer to that question. If you literally have no idea where to start, just sit down, jot down what matters to your audience, where they're coming from, and cross-reference that with your brand story. And if all else fails, if you have bits and pieces of copy written there, then yes, that is the place to start getting them into Instagram. And once actually of all of the tools that I've discussed, I would say content pillars will get you started with social media if that's your real kind of point there. The others are really helpful for kind of having that foundation, but if it's a case of where to start, get content pillars, because it will literally tell you day on day what it is that you need to be posting at any given day, which is a balm for an overworked independent business owner brain. Do I have any more questions coming through in the chat? Because I'm really conscious that if I keep talking and finish up these, there might not be an opportunity for last minute questions. I'm going to give a minute for furious typing if anyone's got any questions. Has everything made sense that I've talked about? Is there anything that I've described that still seems like I've just talked? Can you give more examples of core pillars? Okay, so in the same way that I described an empowerment. Yeah, that's a great question. So more examples of core pillars. I mean, core pillars or sort of core messaging. The core messaging. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I can absolutely do that. Why don't I use some kind of real life examples for this one as well? There's a couple of jewelry brands that are always my go-to when I'm talking about storytelling, because I just think that their kind of brand storytelling is so strong. You've definitely heard these before if you've heard me talk, but that's fine because they make the point. Hannah Martin is one of my go-to examples. Because she's got a very, very strong and very, very original brand story. Hannah Martin, worth a Google. If you don't, but I'm sure you do, know her work. Very, very strong statement pieces, very, very rock and roll, kind of punky, a lot of kind of motifs from rock music. And her kind of core message then is jewelry that's infused with kind of the spirit. Yes, so Hannah Martin's style really links in with her kind of core story. of giving people rock and roll jewelry, whether you are a rock and roller, a lot of her kind of customers and certainly people associated with the brand are, or, and this is key, aspirational for people who probably want to feel rock and roll, but not be, but we can buy into it and feel edgier in our day-to-day life. So that would be kind of the core story behind there. The kind of the rock and roll message is sort of core story with that. The spirit of rock and roll would be a core message. Supporting stories around her brand would be, for instance, her own personal love for music, would be then kind of supporting collaboration, so bringing in people. It would also be where she gets her inspiration from, so she has quite inspirational artistic stories around her work, which are kind of supporting stories, and then also kind of a craft story, in terms of her background, where things are made, etc. For other brands, something like a craft story would be front and center. You think of brands that you might, for instance, go to Goldsmiths Fair if you're here in the UK and go and see. A brand that is really focused on kind of handmaking pieces might say, well, actually, a lot of my customers here are collectors, and the fact that I hand make this, that I hand finish it, that I've got granulation on it, that I've got this particular texture that I've invented, that I've got this whole process that no one else is doing, that might be their core story. And then it's supported by, and this is, look at my sketchbooks, these are my interesting inspirations, and it's all UK made, and it's recycled gold, etc. But the core story is, you're a craftsperson, you're into collecting, that's what you're going to want to know. You're going to want to see the hand of the maker. For plenty of other brands, that's just not relevant. The fact that it's handcrafted is a facet of the story, but it doesn't matter to the customers that much, because it's all about the aesthetic or the kind of story behind it. That's actually a really interesting one to the next comment that's come in. I'm honing in on that corn story and ethical, because what you're describing there actually is something that quite a few people have honed in on as their kind of core stories. And ethical materials is something that is so important, but because it is happily so important, it's become something that customers now kind of expect. There are certain brands out there who are the very first to, some of the very first to kind of be ethical jewelers. And when they put that in their brand story, it was something different to build a brand story about, because there weren't that many people that you could go to try and find ethical jewelry. Even those brands who've been using it in their kind of brand stories from day one have had to tweak their stories a bit to match up for the fact that actually there are so many more people doing that. You'll find a lot of these brands now are kind of positioning themselves as sort of experts. They're demonstrating that they're sort of really making really forward waves in the industry that are doing slightly more interesting things with ethics. So choices that you've got here, handmade, small collections, contemporary, yeah, you're right. Those things alone aren't strong and unique enough because there are so many of them. It's working out what the genuine values for your customers are. So when you've spoken to your customers, have they directly been searching for something that is ethical and handmade? Do you frequently get told it's because I can see you working at the bench, that's what drew me in, I specifically was looking for that? Or actually when someone's talking to you, bear with me, is it something else that's coming through in their meaning, in their reasons for working with you? Is it because you're personable? Is it because you talk them through what it is that you do? Is it because you're great fun? Is it because the aesthetic of your piece is so different? This is a whole process. The fact is that you will have a story. It's about just kind of pulling it out. Independent businesses naturally have stories behind them. Large businesses tend to have to make their stories, not always, but can. They often have the marketing budgets to be able to go and invent a story, and that's fine. Independent businesses have already got the story there because there will be something. It'll be something in the way that you work. It'll be something in the actual product itself. It'll be something in you if you're a real, oh, my electrics are getting ready for Halloween, clearly. It'll be something there. And it's pulling out all of these things, everything that you can think of in your business that's potentially interesting, that you think is interesting, that you think somebody else would think is interesting, and then cross-referencing that with actually what matters to your audience, because so much of what we think is interesting is not actually the biggest value driver for our customers. So that's not a specific answer, because obviously that's really hard to do. It is something I can do, obviously. So shout, but I would say do that exercise, just dig a bit deeper. I think of something maybe unique to start and then start to see it. Yeah, that's so hard. So there's a question here about actually having identified something that feels unique, and then starting to see it everywhere. How do I avoid jumping on the bandwagon or aligning to a saturated market and then finding out it's saturated? This is the bane of designer existences everywhere. It seems that you think you've invented something and you're talking about something, and then it kind of is everywhere. And there's a few different reasons why that happens. It could be that actually you were the first, and people have then jumped on what you're doing, and that's unfortunate. And unless you've really sort of set yourself as the first person to do this, and you've become known as the kind of figurehead for that particular style or different segment in the market, then yeah, that's really, really hard. Or it could be that actually you took your inspiration from somewhere that was coming through, that was out there somewhere in the media, and other people took inspiration from the same thing, and so more or less at the same time, you're sort of all growing in there together. Actually, I can identify this. I think I said at the start of the talk, when I first launched my brand, not many people were talking about storytelling, and that was why I was literally jewelry storytelling. That was my brand name back there, and I talked about jewelry storytelling because nobody else was, and it was, that was my exposure. Talking and kind of educating. There are lots of people talking about storytelling now, and that's the way the market goes and grows. It's the same as in design. And the difference is then how you're talking about something, how you're presenting something. If it's something that you can't and don't want to change, because it was authentic to you, and it wasn't that you were just kind of trend hopping, it sounds like actually it was something unique. If it's unique to you and authentic to you, keep doing it, but think about how you can present it. If other people are presenting this particular thing in a kind of trendy colloquial voice, then you can be the one that's doing it in a kind of sincere way, that's storytelling with it. It's hard without specific examples, but you can either find a unique story or a unique way of telling it, and there are lots of different variables. You can mix up your voice, you can mix up your story, you can mix up how you're presenting your content, you can mix up how you're presenting your visuals, and kind of between those things you can turn something that's becoming a little bit more mainstream into something that feels a little bit more unique. Saturated market is an interesting phrase, because the jewelry market it's huge. Arguably the jewelry market is saturated, but it is still possible to stand out. There are plenty of people out there who've been in the jewelry market for decades, and they don't need to worry about storytelling and presenting themselves in interesting ways, because they've kind of cornered their bit of the market. Anyone that's kind of coming through now does need to focus on it a bit more and work a little bit harder. But there are multiple tools, like I said, from the story to the voice to the visuals, and it's finding that kind of mix between them. It's potentially looking outside of the industry. When I'm starting off a brand storytelling project with someone, I always do market research. We always look at how other brands are communicating, and it's not about positioning market research. It's not about we're selling these kind of collections in this format at that price. That's a different discipline. It's about how are people communicating, what are they talking about, in what kind of voice, how are they making people feel, and then working out, well, actually, what do we like, what don't we like, and how we can be different and take different bits. And sometimes that's looking at non-jewelers, because they're potentially doing something that we can learn from, that can be transferable, or that we can tweak for ourselves. So the longer answer is there are ways, but it's just generally kind of thinking about those different prongs that can kind of come off the backbone story. Yeah. I'm conscious we've hit the end of the hour. If there are any final questions, please feel free to furiously type them in the chat box, because if there is one or two more, I will tackle those. If not, let me know what you thought. If there's any final comments or questions, pop them in the chat now. Otherwise, I think we are rounding that up. And as I said, this format is new for me, so if there's any feedback, I would be very grateful and happy to have that. Did that work for you? And thank you very much, and evening/afternoon. Night, everyone.